So we're going to start with 2-1. Again, we're only going to do part of it. Really, we just need to learn some vocab. In 2-1, which is called inductive reasoning, we learned these two vocabulary terms, conjecture and inductive reasoning. A conjecture is an unproven statement that's based on an observation. And then inductive reasoning is a process that includes looking for patterns and making conjectures. So an unproven statement that's based on observation. Let's say you walk into class. Okay, so I assigned the review over the weekend, right? Let's say I didn't collect it. Let's say I said, Friday, here, go home, do this review. And on Monday morning, I started talking about the content was the review. And all of your faces look like, what the heck is she talking about? Okay, and I ask a couple of questions and people don't know the answers. So my conjecture is that you did not do the review. I'm assuming based on the patterns, based on not knowing what the answers are, looking confused, those kind of things, that's a conjecture. You did not do the review, okay? And then inductive reasoning is the process in which I would have to look at the pattern. If one person and then one person and then one person did not know the answers, that's kind of a pattern that's formed. Then we're going to eventually talk, when we get into 3, like a deductive reasoning. That's based on fact. So if I did an assignment where I collected it and I saw that you didn't turn it in, that's based on fact, knowing that you did not do it. Okay, so there's an inductive, which is a lot of patterns. You're looking for patterns, that kind of stuff. And then deductive. So 2-1 is just patterns. So describe how to sketch the fourth figure in the pattern and then sketch the fourth figure. So if I look at figure 1, 2, and 3, what's the pattern that's forming here?
Times 2.
I mean, you're kind of all right? Like I'm taking a circle for the first one and I've just divided it in half, yes? Then I've divided it an additional time the next time. Then I've divided it an additional time the next time, right? So if it went from 2 parts to 4 parts to 6 parts, what do we think the next one's going to be? 8 parts. And how much of that is shaded? 1 part. So if I drew a circle, this is going to be really bad. Actually, I can do this. Okay, and then I can do 1, 2, this is not good. 2, you get the point. 3, 4, and then you could do it better than me in Notability because you can get those to be straight. And then just 1 part of it has to be shaded in. It doesn't matter what part, just what part. So when it says describe how to sketch the fourth figure, we would divide a circle into 8 parts. And then color in 1 part. Easy stuff, right? Just figuring out a pattern. If I go to example 2, it says describe the pattern in the numbers. 5.01, 5.03, 5.05, 5.07. What's happening? Good. I'm adding 0.02 to each number. So what would be the next 3 numbers after 5.07? 5.09, 5.11, 5.13. Good. Questions on those? Okay, we're going to skip to 2-2. So we're going to ignore the rest of those examples, okay? Homework is going to cover patterns, that kind of thing. We're going to go to 2-2. So 2-2 is called analyzing conditional statements. So we start with, what is a conditional statement? A conditional statement has 2 parts, a hypothesis and a conclusion. It is usually written in if-then format. For example, if you study, then you will get an A. Where the you study is the hypothesis and the you will get an A is the conclusion. Now notice the hypothesis actually doesn't include the word if. It's what follows if. And the conclusion doesn't include the word then. It's what follows then. So if I gave you this statement and I asked you to identify the hypothesis, it's you study. And the conclusion is you will get an A. So it doesn't have the words if and then in it. Is this true? If you study, you'll get an A? Always?
No.
No, right? So it doesn't mean that an if-then statement can't be false. It's just that it's an if-then statement. So we will get into, is it an if-then statement, and then is it true or false, okay? So the negation of the statement is if it's false, okay? The original statement is it is raining. The negation is the opposite. It is not raining. So you literally just put the word not in front of it, or if the word is not there, then you take it out. Like, the shirt is not red. The negation of it is the shirt is red. So you're just stating the opposite. So if I said it is cold in here, is the negation it is hot in here? No, it's what? It is not cold. Does that make sense? Okay. Converse is formed by changing the order of the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the hypothesis becomes the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So if your original statement is, if you study, then you'll get an A, then the converse is, if you got an A, then you studied. Notice that the tense changed so that it makes sense. Like, your grammar should still make sense. It's not, if you will get an A, then you study. Doesn't make sense, right? So you want to actually change it so that it would make sense grammatically. So you switch the order on a converse. Questions on that one? Okay, the inverse is found by negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So stating the opposite of the hypothesis and the conclusion. So again, if my original statement is, if you study, then you'll get an A. Then the inverse is, if you didn't study, then you didn't get an A. Or if you don't study, then you won't get an A. Something like that. So you've got your original if-then, converse, switch the order, inverse, make the opposite both of the inverse and the converse. I mean, the inverse and of the hypothesis and the conclusion. Sorry. Contrapositive is formed by writing the converse, which means you are switching the order. And then negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So you are basically doing the converse and the inverse. You're doing both. You're switching the order, God bless you, and you're negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if my original statement is, if you study, then you'll get an A. The converse is, if you got an A, then you studied. We switched the order. Contrapositive, if you didn't get an A, then you didn't study. So we switched the order and then changed it to the opposite. Okay, obviously sometimes there's false statements. So if an if-then statement is false, if an example can be found for which the hypothesis is true, but the conclusion is false. The example is called a counterexample. So another vocab term. So a counterexample is one in which it makes the hypothesis true, but the conclusion false. So think about that. If I had the if-then statement that says, if you live in Florida, then you live in Miami. So what would be a counterexample? Now keep in mind that that means you have to live in Florida, but not live in Miami. What's a counterexample?
If you live in Florida, you don't live in Miami.
So what would be a specific not Miami?
Oh, never mind.
Where do y'all live?
Jackson.
Weston, Jacksonville, Pembroke Pines, Miramar, Coral Springs, Fort Lauderdale, Southwest Ranches, right? Those are all counterexamples. So you still live in Florida, but you don't live in Miami. Does that make sense? So when you write the counterexample, you don't even have to write it in if-then form. You can write Daisy. You can write Davy. You can write Coral Springs. You can say Weston. You could say Miramar. Okay, all of these are counterexamples. They have to be in Florida, though, because you want it to be true for the first part and not true for the second part. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. A biconditional statement can be made if the conditional statement and its converse is true. And a biconditional statement is one in which you can use the words if and only if. So if an angle has a measure of 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Is that true?
Yes.
If it has 90 degrees, then it's a right angle. True, yes? We agree on that? What's the converse to that statement?
If an angle is 90 degrees, then it's a right.
If an angle is 90 degrees,
It's a right.
then it's a right angle.
Wait, you can't write then? Wait, you can write then?
Yeah, this is, so the converse is still an if-then statement.
Oh.
Yep. So is that true? If an angle is 90 degrees, then it's a right angle?
Yeah.
Yes. So if both the original statement and the converse are true, then you can write a biconditional statement like an angle has a measure of 90 degrees if and only if it is a right angle. Or an angle is a right angle if and only if it has a measure of 90 degrees. So only if the original statement and its converse are true can you make a biconditional statement. Can I make a biconditional statement out of if you live in Florida, then you live in Miami? No. How about if this month is, what are we in, September, then next month is October?
Yeah.
What's the converse of that? That's the if. So what's the converse? If I start it, if this month is September, then next month is October.
The month from next
Next
month
month
is
is
If
October.
next month is October, then this month is September. True?
Yes.
Yes? So this month is September if and only if next month is October, or next month is October if and only if this month is September. Does that make sense? Okay, both have to be true in order to make it. So you will see things like, is it true? If it's not, provide a counterexample. If it is, make a biconditional statement. Like this. If you attend AMHS, then you wear an ID. Use the above statement to identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. Then state the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. Then, is the converse a false statement? If yes, provide a counterexample. Go ahead, do that. All right, so what's the hypothesis? You attend AMHS. What's the conclusion? You wear an ID. Okay, then it says state the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. So converse is what?
If you wear an ID, then you attend.
Good. If you wear an ID, then you attend AMHS. Okay, what's the inverse?
If you don't attend AMHS.
Good. Original order, but don't. Opposites, right? So if you don't attend AMHS, then you don't wear an ID. Okay, and what's the contrapositive?
You flip them and you put don't in it.
Yep, okay, so order changes if you, good. If you don't wear an ID, then you don't attend AMHS. Okay. Sometimes people confuse like converse, contrapositive. Think the word contrapositive is a longer word. You have to do more things, right? It takes you longer to do it because you have to flip it and negate it. So the longer one is the contrapositive. All right, then C says, is the converse a false statement? So if we look back on the converse and it says, if you wear an ID, then you attend AMHS. Is that true or false?
False.
False. What would make it false? What would be a counter example?
Because most high schools you wear an ID.
Okay, so you attend other schools. Anybody come up with something else? Anybody have like a parent that works in the medical field that has to wear an ID, or works in a corporate office that has to wear an ID, right? I have to wear an ID. I don't attend AMHS. Okay, so any other example in which you would wear an ID but you don't attend AMHS works there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Example 2 says, rewrite the pair of conditionals as a biconditional. So you have two statements here. If M is between L and N, then LM plus MN equals LN, and it's converse. If LM plus MN equals LN, then M is between L and N. So how can we put those together to make a biconditional statement?
LM plus MN equals LN if and only if M is between L and N.
Good. LM plus MN equals LN if and only if M is between L and N. What's the other way to write it?
LN, and then M is between L and N if only if LN plus MN equals LN.
Good. Oops. M is between L and N if and only if LM plus MN equals LM. I feel like it's a tongue twister. It's hard to say. All right. Either one of those works because they are both true. The order of both of them is true. The order doesn't matter. So LM plus MN equals LN if and only if M is between L and N, and M is between L and N if and only if LM plus MN equals LN. So lots of vocab, inductive, conjecture, conditional statement, hypothesis, conclusion, converse, inverse, contrapositive, biconditional, counterexample. You want to make sure you know all those words, okay? And then your assignment, I already took the 2 and put them together, so there's just a couple of problems from 2-1, and then the rest is from 2-2. It's on your to-do list, due tomorrow.